You don't need to be a celebrity to be a podcaster. What you need to be is a storyteller. Someone who thinks in audio because you want to create an experience for your listeners. Like using music to make a point. Or planning the story arc of multiple episodes. Or taking a 2-hour interview and distilling it to 20 minutes of key insights. If this sounds nerdy, well, it is. We talk to experts who can nerd out about a topic, and we get nerdy about production too.
I'm Mark, and I can make people sound like they're in a car,
at a basketball game,
even in outer space.
Carl here. When I'm not working on the business side, sometimes I get to record music for our audio beds.
I'm Pam of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. With Puma Podcast, I dug through 30 years of our archives to write the award-winning True Crime Pod, Super Evil.
Ako si Macy. I started out as a junior producer. Now, I produce and host my own show.
Puma Podcast kami. Kayo na rin!
Asia 21, I would say, is a global family of dreamers and thinkers.
Very diverse individuals who are individually quite accomplished.
People that when you meet them, you get inspired by them.
Incredibly smart, but incredibly humble people
that are working on some of the most pressing issues in their respective countries.
Who have a common heartbeat about making this world a better place, not just by their own strength and their talents, but by the ability to work together.
I am Asia 21.
Mama Asia Viseka Sangdane Tatna
Asia 21.
Asia 21. Ma Asia 21.
我是亚洲阿亚本人。
私はアジア。
Hi, kamusta? Ako po si Robbie Alampay ng Puma Podcast. Kung nanonood ka ngayon, siguro gusto mo rin ng pagbabago. Ang tanong, paano nga ba? The late Chito Gascon dedicated his life to defending democracy and human rights. Although many people know him as the chairperson of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, he started his career as a student leader, a youth organizer. He had a strong and abiding faith in reform and in the power of the youth to make it happen. It's in that spirit that 4 organizations came together for this: Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, Bukas Conversations for Action, and Youth Leadership for Democracy, or Youth-Led. You're watching Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago, the Chito Gascon Leadership Series. In each episode, you will hear from a luminary who has led the way for their generation. And then a panel of next generation leaders will discuss the challenges we face today. In today's episode, Changing Education, Educating for Change. We tackle the broad topic of education in the Philippine context. In this intergenerational conversation, we invite members of the public and private sector to gather and discuss multi-pronged intersectional approaches to education reform. To set the tone for today's discussion, let's welcome Ms. Ching Jorge. Ching is Chief of Party for Youth Leadership for Democracy, or Youth-Led, recognized both locally and internationally for her work on education and development. She has led and co-founded youth-focused organizations and managed implementation of nationwide programs on democratic citizenship, education, and good governance. She also has executive management experience in the private sector with a focus on corporate social responsibility and human capital. Ching, welcome.
Hello, Robbie. Thank you very much for the invite. I am happy to be part of this production.
Well, your part is saying it lightly. We'd also like to thank you and Youth-Led for partnering with all of us, Asia Society, Philippines, and Puma Podcast, for bringing this wonderful series together, of course, to honor our friend as well, the late, great Chito Gascon. But let's get into something that, if I'm not mistaken, Chito was in fact a former education undersecretary rin, di ba?
Correct, yes. And also a youth leader. A student leader, a youth leader, yes. That's right.
Oh, parang it's also, it's interesting that we introduced you as managing a program for citizenship, good governance, and education. And talk to us about that, because it's a youth-led. There's really an intersection, di ba? Parang citizenship has to come with education. And even awareness of what it takes for politics and good governance to actually work. This all ties in. Makabago bang palaisipan yan?
Hindi naman siya makabagong palaisipan. And if we're talking about reforms in education or educating for change, no, we're talking about partnerships, collaboration, private sector, civil society, government working together, and when we're looking at like multi-sectoral collaboration, and especially since I've had the opportunity to work closely with, I think, 4 or 5 DepEd administrations, and very important here, in the work that we do for education, for leadership, for citizenship, is partnerships and collaboration. And the ones that are, for me, most effective are the ones that look at impact, sustainability, long-term viability, and scale. Yeah, and then
a lot of big concepts there, di ba? But I just want to start something very personal. I mean, you're an Asia 21 young leader as well. I think I'm a few years ahead of you in Asia 21. But not to date us, pero I'm curious. I have my own answers here. I have my own reflections. But when we talk about education, whatever that brings to you, what has changed? We say educating for change and changing education. Let's tackle the first thing first. From your perspective, and I'm not just talking about content, but also about philosophy and also about need, or even urgency. From your perspective, from your experience, anong nagbago sa education in your lifetime?
In my lifetime. Okay, so I'll go back to having worked with several administrations on on in-depth ed and for education. No? And because a lot of my work is with private sector and with civil society, and of course, coming up with initiatives and programs for education, I've seen different uh, forms of programs. Some really good, some we hope could have lasted more than that administration. So there and when it comes to private sector and civil society support, there's really no end to the list of corporations, foundations, who want to support education. And over the years, the years that I've worked in this sector, the contribution of civil society and private sector has been in the billions, and that hasn't changed. That's something that has been constant. But these contributions have to be aligned with the vision of education for the country, and um, the kind of investment we want to make for youth, and the kind of citizenry we want to develop. So I think that is something that is important. No. Kasi I mean, you will always come up with all these, bright ideas and all that. But if these interventions are, and they have to be systematic and institutionalized in order for it to be lasting and have impactful change, because that's what we want. So our education mindset, or for reform, should be to start investing in the kind of society we want to see 15, 20, 25, even 30 years from now, along with what kind of industries will take the helm, and how this strengthen progress and bolster growth for the country. So all of that is connected. And for me, I think that's something that's been missing. And also, I mean, what's constant is the support. It's always there, and it's always going to be there, especially when you work on and visit schools and communities in different parts of the country. You will always be inspired, and you'll always want to help and support. No, but it's connecting this to the long-term vision of the country. Seeing it not just as short-term solutions, but really looking at it as long-term solutions and long-term vision.
And so having a vision not just for the education system per se, but
It's
having
everything.
a vision for our citizens, for our kids who will grow up into adults.
Yes, because what is education for? You want the kind of education that will give you productive citizens who are able to thrive in any in this world, and be able to be productive, right? And to be able to contribute to nation building. And what does that entail? It's not just education. It's really all of the sectors, all of the agencies working together towards that goal. If you just isolate it to just looking at education reform without connecting it to how does this now contribute to the economy, how do you now what kind of workers or what kind of industries do you want the country to be champions in 20 years from now? It has to be all connected. It's all like that.
Okay. Sige, let's bring in, hindi naman tayo mag-isa dito, Ching. Nag-umpisa lang tayo kasi kahit pa paano magka-generation tayo. But we're bringing in a lot of young blood. Speaking of people who thrive and people that, let's face it, our education system produced these wonderful people. That's something to start with. There must be some inspiration there. Let's bring in Love Basillote. Love is the Executive Director of the Philippine Business for Education, or PBED. And then let's also bring in Grace David, CEO of Educacion.ph. That's the largest edtech platform in the Philippines, empowering the youth to explore everything that they can do. And Sab Schnabel is a friend, colleague, and also a historian. I'm so proud to say that she works with us at Puma Podcast. We produce her WhatsApp. That's What's AP, or What's Araling Panlipunan. That's a podcast that everybody should listen to. Even now, I learned a lot. But thank you to our young people here. Love, in particular, is also an Asia 21 young leader. I want to start with you, Love, kasi ikaw sa Philippine Business for Education, or PBED. maybe you could give us some baseline. Alam mo, as a journalist, I apologize for this. Sanay kami in covering the problems, di ba? We always start with, bata pa ako, yan na yung coverage, di ba? Kulang tayo ng rooms, kulang tayo ng tables, underpaid ang teachers, itong performance natin. I know there are still problems. But when you talk about education in the Philippines, where do you start? How do you begin to frame not just the challenges, but the hope and the promise?
Hi, Robbie. Thanks for that. I just want to clarify, I'm not an Asia 21 leader.
Hindi ba? Sorry.
No, I'm not. But thanks for thinking that I'm one.
Para ka nang.
Para na ako.
Binansagan na kita. Okay na yan. Bahala na si Ching Jorge.
No. So just to answer your question directly, actually for me kasi, when it comes to education, I look at it in two ways. So I start from statistics, so the data, and also stories. Let me start with stories first, because I think for education, we all have an education story, right? So for people who probably grew up in privilege, didn't have to think about tuition fees and being able to take an exam because your parents already paid for your year in university or in school. Your story of education is probably more, say, on the homework, on your friends, etc. For some people, it's about stories of difficulty, right? Like that they have a hard time getting to school, literally, because they are, they take, hours to get to school. But for some people, it's about also having difficulties getting accessing school because of financial reasons or other reasons. So we all have education stories to tell, and I think it's important to understand that, to listen to that. I also have an education story. In fact, Chito Gascon used to be my professor, and so when I got the invitation to this episode, I was like, yes, definitely anything that has Attorney Gascon's name on it, I want my name to be slightly associated to that. And actually, it was his class that led me to my path now. Because I wanted to be a lawyer, I took his human rights graduate seminar, and it opened the world for me. And I thought, actually, I can work in issues in different sectors and help people improve their lives. But that's my education story. Education leading me to where I am now. I had some stories of difficulties, but also stories of successes, and that inspired me to do what I'm doing now. But going back to, I guess, the other side of it, which is the statistics or the data, I try to look for both the problems and the sources of hope in the data. So for education in the Philippines, actually, sources of hope pre-pandemic, we were really doing well when it came to access. More and more kids were going and staying in school. We were, filling the resources gap slowly but surely. But quality remains to be a problem, and so this is the problem, right, in terms of quality. And this is where I think the work needs to really happen now. And so I think looking at the education sector in general, and to directly answer your question, Robbie, where to start, I think we should start by looking at the data or the statistics, but also draw inspiration and strengths from our individual stories, but also collective stories of education.
But Grace, kayo naman, education.ph, and now every time you see a dot anything, diba? .com, .ph, .edu, it suggests na nag-level up naman siguro to. And also in terms of even your stakeholders and your market, the people that you serve and you reach, siguro naman that signals some innovation, something that's changing. Is that true? Is that an oversimplification? Every time we see, being in the digital platform, that it necessarily automatically represents change and innovation. And notwithstanding that, can you still relate? And how do you bridge, whatever new innovations and advancement you represent with the hard realities that Love also touched on?
Yes. It sounds an easy question, but because first allow me to share, ano yung intention natin and expectation natin nung nakita natin, especially during the pandemic, what could really technology bring into the education space? Is it just a matter of let's all make sure that our school system has the website so that information could easily be accessed by the audience, no? It sounds simple. It sounds like that is what technology can bring in. But before I jump into what are the details of that technology, I think what I like with the question is there's that intention of really expecting innovation to be happening in the education space because technology is present. And whoever I get to speak to, even people outside the education space, that is the perception because that is what technology brings to whatever sector na pinupuntahan niya. Let's add technology in the finance world. We have fintech. Let's add actually technology in the retail world. E-commerce has actually rose up, diba? Especially during the pandemic season. But what happened in the education space when we added that layer of let's put technology in the education space, are we able to make education more accessible to our Filipino youth? Are we able to really bring up the level of learning dahil naglagay tayo ng technology? So parang naging yes or no yung naging situation. Let me just paint the picture of ano yung na-experience natin during pandemic. When the pandemic started, even if Filipinos were hesitant to trust their money in the fintech space, it naturally happened. In fact, right now, even if the economy has opened, I am sure all of you has an app on your phone with a fintech application and you're comfortable now to do those transactions online. Same thing happened on e-commerce. Kahit yung pagsusukat ng damit, we Filipinos find it I'd rather be in the store para sure ako sa sapatos at damit na bibilhin ko. But with the pandemic, we're now more comfortable. And kahit na-open na yung mga malls ngayon, I'm sure you're still waiting on that Lazada and Shopee discount and buying certain items on top of going to the mall, doing it online. I was so interested to see that happening in the education space in the entire pandemic journey. Unfortunately, that behavior didn't happen in the education space. In fact, ang nangyari, a lot of our parents downgraded their kids. I-enroll ko na lang yung anak ko during this pandemic years in public school kasi hindi ako sure kung totoong may matututunan yung bata. Online lahat. So the trust of learning happening using technology, not yet completely there. I am not saying that we could replace that face-to-face learning, classroom experience with their teachers and friends could be completely replaced with online learning. But efficiency and accessibility will actually be increasing if we incorporate technology into that learning space.
Grace, if you don't mind, I just want to interject here. And a question to both you and Love. Kasi ganun din parang you're right. During the pandemic, forced to good, di ba? In fact, ako kahit in terms of e-commerce, kahit wala akong binibili, I'm forced to pay. Di ba?
Yes.
Kasi araw-araw may dumadating sa kitchen namin, nagugulat na lang ako. Wala namang kasya sa akin. Di ba? Pero I'm the one who pays. And that's how I got into, having to pay online, having digital wallets, improving my digital banking, and so on. But when we were all covering how to reopen education, and sinabi, lahat parang online learning na tayo, distance learning. We all knew the problems, diba? And if anything, while there was a utopian vision here now, wow, finally it will happen, the first thing that happened was just to highlight the gaps. The first thing it did was just to show all of us, oh my God, this is how far apart we are as a society. You had teachers on the rooftops just trying to look for a signal, a teacher walking at a distance, staying by a roadside kasi dun lang siya may makuwang data. And then not to mention the kids. We see the memes, we saw the videos of kids. And then their parents sitting next to them na mukhang yung parents din nila hindi rin nakapag-aral. And then it becomes just so visceral. How far apart we are. And yung mga napag-iwanan at saka lalong maiiwan. On the other hand, we also can't deny 2 years later that people, nakaraos tayo kahit paano with a lot of sacrifice and probably with a lot of damage, pero nakaraos tayo with digital learning. What's the fair lens? Just to appreciate, itong past 2 years, as it highlighted the gaps, how far apart we are, at the same time, really proved the concept of what's viable, if not necessarily perfect.
Do you want to answer first, Grace? Go ahead.
Sige. When it comes to infrastructure and gadget issues, hardware and software, yes, there is a gap, right? And there really is limitation. But let me also paint the picture. It's exactly the same situation that our parents and Filipino youth are experiencing when they want to access social media, when they want to see what's the latest series of TikTok videos. So, ganyan din yung pinagdadaanan nila, right? Like, if I want to actually get those latest videos of this certain influencer, I've got to make sure that I have a data connection and I have the gadget on my hand. So, obviously, may difficulty level pa rin. But what it actually shows us also is what's the level of importance as a nation, as a community, and even as like pockets of families and individual. Where does education come in comparison to entertainment, in comparison to gaming, and all those other items? So, it's a reflection also of our culture and our values. So, makikita mo dun yung lalim na hindi lang because of the education curriculum and the platforms, there's also like a cultural context that we need to understand. So, may ganun tayo. I think what I just want to respond to that is we saw that up front and there were a lot of like asks not just from the schools but even from the parents and the students kasi nga it was just so hard to really be able to continue and business as usual, schooling as usual, because not everyone had the access to those kinds of infrastructure and gadgets. And apart from that, I think what also further aggravated the situation. Technology also requires a certain level of learning so that we could effectively use those technology available to us. It also showed where is the digital literacy, not just of our students, but also of our educators to immediately utilize the available platform.
Okay. I want to bring in Love there very quickly just to understand the baseline there. Just very quickly, because I do also want to bring in Sab. Because I have a question to her, not just about the content and not just about the access, but to something that Ching was saying, parang the purpose to all of this. Other than leveling the field for access, what else do we think about in terms of improving education? But Love, yung sinasabi ni Grace, very quickly, what did it show us in terms of access? What did it show us in terms of our baseline for this new platform that supposedly we want to take for granted?
Yeah, no, so what it showed us is we had a very low base. We started out really poorly, right? We didn't have infrastructure. And if you look at, for example, data at the beginning of the pandemic, and actually I want to highlight what you said, Robbie, yung tipong, as you go through time over the 2 years, may progress naman. But at the start of the pandemic, kita talaga that we were starting at a low base. Very, very few public school students had access to the internet. And so during in the development of the learning continuity plan of DepEd, for example, we were exploring channels like radio, TV, channels that have already shown very poor correlation to learning outcomes. Pero that's what we had to deal with. We were printing modules kasi that's what we just had to deal with. That's what we had. So it showed that our base was poor. And we started out at a basically low starting base when it came to access in the 21st century environment of learning. Speaking of learning, very poor learning levels also pre-pandemic. Just to remind everyone, 90% of 81% pala. 81% of our 15-year-olds were below global standards for reading, math, and science. That's huge. 81%, right? So and Grace was talking about you need like a certain aptitude to learn new technology. And what if your aptitude was not there in the first place? So ang hirap, diba? So the gap was just too wide for us to really catch up like immediately or respond immediately. But I want to respond to your question directly, Robbie, about what is a fair lens? I think a fair lens is, a realistic lens. Basically, education is not really a priority for many people. They say it is, but compared to health, kasi aanhin ko yung pupunta akong school kung mamatay ako kasi may COVID, they won't go, right? So when it came to really prioritizing during the pandemic, education was put in the back burner because, understandably, it was a public health crisis. But that actually exacerbated an already existing learning crisis. Because in the Philippines, the only effective way right now, given the resources that we have to deliver quality education, is face-to-face instruction. And so we really had to open our schools quickly, but we didn't do that. We're one of the longest, if not the longest, education system that has left its schools closed because of this pandemic. And so, realistic plans, we started out with a poor or low base, but looking at our comparator countries during the pandemic, I don't understand why Indonesia, Vietnam, or like even neighboring countries were able to recover fairly quickly, but we couldn't. So there's something wrong, right? And this is something that we need to really address in order for us to make up for the losses, and then maybe start naman or leapfrog that low pace that we started from.
Okay, so we've been talking about quality, we've been talking about access. I want to bring in Sab and then reopen this conversation also with Ching, because Sab is a historian. She's a writer. She will work for the National Museum and the Peggy Guggenheim in Venice. She was also a research assistant with our late great friend as well, Carlos Celdran. She's an advocate for history, and I wanted to ask you, Sab. Okay, let's get past the low base. Let's get past all the problems. Let's get also forward-looking ngayon tayo. And as Ching said, we also need a vision not just for the education system, but for our citizens as well. And ironically, we're dumping a whole generation into the digital space na with what little access they have na nga, a lot of that access pa is on social media. And a lot of that social media, we don't even understand. I've installed TikTok 6 times to understand it. I've uninstalled it 6 times as well because I don't understand it. And frankly, it overwhelms me. It really, really overwhelms me. And we know all the conversation about bad information, disinformation, revisionist history. From what you understand of the digital space, and really, it's part of what's educating our children right now. It's not just the schools, whether it's face-to-face or online. The reality is the internet, for better or for worse, is perhaps even a more powerful nanny and guidance and guardian for our children. When you as a historian and as an educator doing what you do, creating content, what do you think, and given the problems that we face now, what do you think should be a direction for our education system?
I feel like right now we have an embarrassment of riches. Like when it comes to content, when it comes to information, there's just so much out there. And we're really having problems now with discerning what is good information, what is bad information, trying to sort of rake through everything that we are being exposed to and finding out like what is the kernel of truth here, what are the key concepts here, what should I be looking into. And so I don't know if I can be arrogant enough to say this is where the direction that I think all education should go to, but I do think a lot of that media education needs to become paramount. Like we really need to learn how to sort of weed out the good from the bad. We have to learn how to investigate sources. We all have to become historians almost. We all have to learn how to look into the sources that we're getting our information and sort of investigate that and think about who's telling us this information. We don't get to anymore have the luxury of just sort of passively accepting everything that comes at us. We now need to be a lot more discerning about the information that we absorb and that we are synthesizing. So I think that we really need a strong media literacy and social media literacy understanding that needs to happen in our education system, because if not, we're going to start seeing this misinformation creep, this like creeping, like sinister under the sort of like subtext that changes a lot of the sort of establishment, the things that we've known to be true, that are starting to change these facts and make them alternative facts, right? So that's what we need to start moving towards, is this literacy of investigation of sources.
Yeah, but Sab, paano yan? And Ching, Love, Grace, I mean, this is such an important question. I'll throw this to all of you. But what do we do? Do we just still stay in this platform knowing that it will work out? We will all help each other. It will work out. But in the meantime, we know that we are leaving our children basically, and let's face it, a lot of them unsupervised once they're in this space. But also knowing that part of the baseline, tama ba, Love? Part of the baseline is in our PISA assessments. A very pitiful percentage of our kids can actually even identify and differentiate a statement of fact from a statement of opinion. So, like I said, Ching, how do we backstop our kids? As Sab said, we have to teach them media literacy, but you will have to assume that at a certain point, they're leaning back against something, and then you can let them go. But that just leaves us into a never-ending vicious cycle, where, so I guess ang tanong ko sa iyo, Ching, is you've been working with institutions. Can we leave this to the institutions? Can we trust our institutions, even with participation from the different sectors? Do we have enough to backstop our kids so that the media literacy, the information literacy that they need can at least be there?
Okay, we're talking about so many things, Robbie. No, first we're talking about like, can we leave our kids to the institutions? We should be able to, right? And if you're talking about households where parents are actually capable of providing support for online learning, providing homeschooling support, or are able to provide that kind of guidance for their children, then you have like a formal, informal learning approach that will really be helpful for the child, right? But when you have a majority of a population where some parents are not equipped to be able to support their children at home, then which again we were talking about this earlier because of the pandemic, right? And that's why there was this call. Some parents couldn't handle the kids at home, and plus they were too busy also doing other things, right? And so then you have to have institutions that will be able to take care of your kids and will be able to provide them the kind of education that will provide for the needs. But you're looking at them, we're talking about our population where you you have parents that need to continuous education, right? And then you have a very small percentage of our population will be able you'll be able to have that kind of handle them for homeschooling or that. Not everyone, not all families in the Philippines are capable of that. So you need strong institutions to be able to provide that kind of support for our children. Now, um, I will leave the problems and the issues and the statistics to Grace and Love, okay? And I will look more at a like a holistic look at that, how we can further support our I mean what's lacking, or what, or something that can give us new fuel for education, and for the work that we're doing in education reform. So today I just came from, and Love was there as one of our partners also. So I came from a briefing with our DepEd regional directors. So we talked to regional directors from all 17 regions because we wanted to talk to them about some initiatives that we've been doing for education. Because I mean, if you want to make sure your reforms happen, you have to institutionalize them, and you have to make sure that these are reforms that are accepted at the institutional level, right? And then at the same time can be implemented at the when you talk about the home. Okay, so, and we were talking about the importance of leadership and civic education for children, for young learners. Okay, and how this is important as a 21st century skill. And then, but looking at it from like how students appreciate and master, because we're talking about how important STEM is, reading, but students can actually appreciate and master academics better if they have an educational experience. So we're talking about not just what they said, but studying at home and their homeworks and the curriculum, but an educational experience that develops their social and social and emotional learning competencies. So how it happens all at the same time, as well as civic rights and responsibilities. So you put now your academic learning in a larger, more meaningful context, right? It helps to establish, and helps young, learners or students, understand their role, what their role is in the family, in the community, in the nation, right? And then that's how you get, students who are able to participate meaningfully in nation building. So I want to focus on that also, the educational experience, because I've had so many discussions on curriculum, teacher training, and all that, right? But sometimes, just the experience for the child, what is it like for that child going to school? How the way we teach in our public schools, is it the way and especially now with technology and all that, is it still the way that we are supposed to teach, right?
Yeah.
And so all these things, and I'm glad that Love is here, Sab is here, Grace is here with all the technology and all the knowledge on how to innovate. I think that's something that we need to do now, because yung mga solutions natin noon, Robbie, hindi na siguro nag-a-apply ngayon. At saka all of the problems that that are still existing, and it's been 30 years, and there's still the same problems. It just tells you that there's a and then Love was saying kanina, di ba, the other countries are recovering faster. How come we haven't? Because our foundations are not strong enough. We don't really have that. I don't want to. Well, you're gonna cut me if I continue talking. So, but anyway, yeah. But it's really building stronger foundations, right? So that we can become more resilient and understanding, right?
Yeah.
Understanding what the students need and not what we think they need.
But I think when you say strong foundations, that's clear on an institutional level, diba? We don't need to, we know it's a whole of society approach. We need more money, we need more resources, we need more help, we need more innovation. Okay, all of that is fine. But on the individual level, Love, Grace, give us an idea of at the individual level, ano ba yung basic thing? What are the basic skills and what are the baseline competencies that a child, let's say a grade schooler, needs for you to say, okay yan, okay yan. Yung batang yan, he or she has enough of a solid foundation to then move on and to proceed in these new platforms.
Ako, as an educator or working in the education space, no, for me, it's back to basics. Like it's an oldie but a goodie. The 3 R's: reading, writing, and well, 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. For me, that's the basic. Like if they can just do that, they can be taught digital literacy. They can be taught, social media, digital citizenship, because they can read and they understand what they are reading. When you see statistics, Robbie, like what was it, the estimate of UNESCO, right, or UNICEF, 90% of our 10-year-olds cannot read a simple sentence, can't understand a simple sentence. That's insane. Like no matter how much digital literacy you teach them, parang they don't understand it because they can't even read. So those 3 foundations, if you have that, you can really reach far in life. Just a personal anecdote. I come from a very, very like lower middle class family. But education saved me. And the reason why I was able to, and I didn't really have access to books at home. So like many students now in public schools, they don't have books at home, right? Like so, like the how reading is taught kasi is through books. You read books to them. Pero that wasn't how I was taught to read. How I was taught to read was to sound out the words. So parang through singing, through songs, through nursery rhymes. Kasi yun yung may access ako. I didn't have books, but like all these sophisticated pedagogy of teaching kids how to read. Hindi like you need to go back to basics and really understand, to Ching's point, meet the kids where they are. So in my case, I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't have access to books. My parents taught me how to read through sounding out words or syllables. Phonics, it's yung technical term for it, right? Phonics or phonetics. So and because of that, I was able to read better than most of my peers. And because of that, I was set to like the star section. And then yun na yun, like the trajectory. I had a good start because I was taught how to read at an early age using the resources that my parents had, not necessarily the sophisticated pedagogy. And then my dad, who was, trained as an engineer, taught me math. And kasi parang basically they were able to fill in the gaps of the education system and like really give me solid foundations in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that like set me on this trajectory that I'm on now. And so yeah, basic, those 3 things talaga, reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Grace, give us an idea. I mean, you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of I don't know what you call them, students enrolling, seeking help from education.ph. Apart from telling us what exactly education can offer, what's a typical thing in terms of the next loves of the next generation? What are they contending with right now? Even assuming that they can even get to your platform, even assuming that they have enough access at the most basic level, that they're literate enough to navigate to education.ph to get themselves there. What's the typical profile of people getting to your site and their level of competency? And are there still, notwithstanding your obviously to have a startup in this space, you have to have a lot of idealism and a lot of dreams. But notwithstanding that, are there still barriers, even when people get themselves to a platform like education.ph?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to connect it with what Love has shared, like the importance of the 3 R's, which is going to be basic, so that that would be their jump off point on what they want to pursue, no? Because that one will really be the fundamentals, how we could define if they are literate enough, diba, to actually be looking into the next level of their education. Now, the profile of the students coming to our website, the basic need is that they would want to be guided on what would be the kind of courses, what would be the kind of career that they want to pursue. So obviously, it's automatically a reflection of like what they're passionate about. But passion will not be enough for you to really have that successful future, because it really has to be passion together with skills. Now, with the numbers that Love has shared, like how low is actually our learning assessment right now, the literacy of our learners. In fact, I remember reading a research done by ADP, which came out even before the pandemic. In comparison to other countries, our learners are actually 2 years behind. That report was showcasing our grade 6 students are actually with the grade 4 learning in comparison to the other countries. And then pag nung lumabas din recently, like what's the reading comprehension of Filipinos against all other Asian countries? We were again at the bottom. So please think about what could be that next level, higher learning that we could be sharing, we could be exposing our current students right now, merong kailangang habulin. So I think what education is doing right now, apart from guiding them, now these are like the courses, these are the careers that you could pursue. We knew that it was not enough. We've got to actually augment something on their K to 12 learning so that they could really be also prepared to pursue what kind of career they really want to aspire for. No? So, 4 C's is actually what I want to add to the 3 R's that Love has shared. One item we've got to acknowledge, technology is moving so fast. So even if na-train natin yung mga bata ngayon that this is the digital literacy that we should know, 6 months later, it will be completely different again. Like the Googles of this world will be releasing new product iteration and new set of technology. So the 4 C's that we are seeing that should be added into that basic literacy for our Filipino youth. One is definitely creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. Because with those 4 C's, kahit anong technology, bagong technology yung ma-introduce sa kanila, they would be more flexible and the learning agility would be faster so that they could be relatable and adaptable to the new technologies getting presented. So as you can see here, Robbie, it's not just a focus on a certain subject, but really what are the skills that we want our learners to have.
Okay. Speaking of skills, I guess this is the whole point also why I wanted Sab here as a historian, using new platforms also to tell stories. Are skills enough to backstop not the 3 R's, not even the 4 C's, but the 1 H, for example, history. There's something like that, diba? We keep talking about, parang ang problema is okay. And I have full confidence in that it is basic, it is what everybody's looking at. But let's face it, part of our concerns now as a society goes to citizenship. This is why Ching, that's why we're working with Ching and YouthLed. And part of citizenship, of course, is a very strong sense of our history. Hindi naman kaila sa inyo that's a very big issue right now. And even, if reports are true, even without the digital space, even in their textbooks, we have a lot of kids being fed the wrong information, even totally denying and erasing history. Sab, from what you've seen and from what you understand of our education system, and from what you understand or even don't understand about social media and how our kids consume content there. Do you think it's enough that if they have the 3 R's, the 4 C's, that when it comes to things that are not quite as, have hard and fast rules, that they are equipped to understand history, the critical learning that Grace mentioned, uh, as long as it's there against the deluge of information, do they stand a chance?
I think that there is a lot that we can do. There are a lot of skills that we can hone. The critical thinking is so important. There's just so much out there that's vying for attention. I think that teachers have a really, really difficult job when it comes to taking something so big, the big capital H, right? History. They have to take this big thing and they have to teach it to a curriculum. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges, and something that, because we have all of these new education sectors, we have all of these new education sources, like podcasts and things. We have there's even more to sort of look at. And so that critical thinking is so important. But I think that it's also the responsibility of us content creators to be like, this is where I get my sources. Here is what I have to say about something, but this is where I've backed it up before. Because once people start to see that, oh, you can check, you can look it up, you can also learn for yourself. There has to be a little bit more of that accountability when it comes to content creation. You can't just say things. You have to sort of back it up so that people will also learn from consuming the content. Oh, this is good content because I can verify it, because they say this is where it's coming from, rather than just making claims. I think we also need to expect a little bit more from our content creators to be more circumspect when it comes to that.
But what if they don't want to be? Diba? What if they just want the engagement? I mean, the reality is that's what we're competing with. There are influencers, there are vloggers, there are content creators, some with political motives, some don't need political motives to just try to get after, to go after engagement. And that's what we're contending with, di ba? I mean, like I told you, natatakot ako sa TikTok because every time I open it up, I don't even understand. They said, oh, it knows you better than you know yourself. It will show you based on your behavior. And I'm like, okay, why is it constantly feeding me scenes na mga nagbabasketball sa ilalim ng puno? Di ba? Para mga liga sa barangay, di ba? It keeps showing me prank videos. And it's entertaining, di ba? It's entertaining. I guess that's my question. Parang I want to keep poking at this. Like, what backstops us? How do we teach kids? Di ba? It's one thing to tell them, kailangan meron kayong credible sources. Kailangan meron kayong naiintindihan nyo to always just go for it. But how do they even know? How do they even know what is a good source for education? Particularly, I mean, not math, di ba? That's very, very objective. But all other stuff.
I think this is where the institutions sort of have to come in. There needs to be a little bit more oversight on what children are looking at and what children are consuming. I mean, I know that I come from a privileged position, so I can say, there should be some oversight there. But that, I think, is the only way that we're going to do that. Oversight from our institutions, from our teachers, from our parents, from our peers. That's why I said everyone needs to be a historian now. Even your peers can be like, what are you reading? What are you looking at? When I get sent something, when anyone gets sent something, you have to say right away, oh, who sent it to me? What was the purpose of them sending this to me? And so just teaching kids that they have to be that thoughtful about whatever they're consuming on the internet is going to be very important in the next couple of years. because as much as we want to say, as much as we want to say that content creators have to be responsible, have to show their sources, have to talk about their sources, you're right. It's so much easier to just make claims that are fun and easier to say and sound bites that are easy to digest.
Ching and Love, you've interfaced, and Grace as well, you've interfaced a lot with our institutions. Nabanggit niya ni Sab, no? Parang the institutions should be there to backstop. They just have to do better. But it's the same question as well. How do they do better? And from your interface with the institutions, both dealing with them as bureaucracies and also dealing with them as officials. And let's face it, when I say officials, a lot of these are senior officials as well. Are our institutions capable of dealing with these new realities in education, particularly the digital realities?
Like digital. but Robbie, can I just say something about content, and all that misinformation thing? Because I think a lot of responsibility lies in the hands of our media and our content creators, to make sure that during the election period and all that, it's really content. We were bombarded with content with the intent to misinform, right? So sometimes it's not because it's not the kids actually are able to verify their sources more properly. They look at different sources compared to adults. Adults are your number one victims of misinformation and fake news, right? But I want to go back to media and content creators. But I know that there's also a lot of effort and discussions on that already, and really looking at that intent. It's not just about sharing fake news, because sometimes even our friends do that, right? But it's those who make it their purpose to create content that is aimed to misinform and create different set of facts. So I think for me that is one problem, and then there's a lot of financial incentives there, etc., etc. Long conversation, but I think that is something that I think that different and a separate conversation, but that is something that has to be addressed, especially now it's so easy to get paid. But in terms of our institutions and our senior officials, or those who are leading these institutions, I think that their hearts are in the right place. They are passionate about what they do, and they do care about our learners. But I just for me, parang three questions that I can even ask them, no? Are we teaching at the same pace that our students are able to learn? No? Or do things need to change, right? Are we responding to what students need over what we or what we think they need? Kasi alam mo, ang dami nating natututunan, nababasa and all that. So feeling natin ito dapat na ganito ang dapat na paraan para turuan sila. Ito ang dapat nila malaman. But really, we should go down, listen to what they need, and when we address that, then right, we will probably be able to to create.
Pero yung tanong ko sa Ching, di ba? Kasi parang, look, I'm from media, di ba? And if you tell us, no, your content has to be better, we try, di ba? But I'm saying that coming from a particular demographic. And the reality is I have to work with young people like Sab, because, they take to the new platforms of storytelling, like fish to water. They can understand it quickly. And I give up, di ba? I give up. I'll try to give strategic directions and so on. But realistically, I have to take myself out of that. And our problem is not the quality of the content, I'd like to think. Our problem is the reach. Our problem is, we don't know how to get to the audience anymore. And I guess that's my question also for the
Yeah, yeah,
education
yeah.
sector.
Yeah,
Diba? In the same way, do we basically need, let's just say, an education secretary, for example, of a younger demographic? Diba? Parang, do we need
Coming soon.
oh yes, coming soon. Coming soon. Yes, coming soon. And we pin our hopes something on that we have a much younger education secretary coming in. But does that does the fact that it is a younger person, it is in this case Sara Duterte coming in, never mind the politics, whatever people want to think, but just the fact that it's going to be a younger education secretary, does that change something fundamentally, you think, Love, Grace?
I think Robbie, probably in the sense that when you are, so I feel like, which is sad, no, many of our managers, not just in education sector, but I think people in general, when we get older, we feel like, oh, I've been there, I've done that. Like, but to use your words, Robbie, if it's something that, I don't take it like fish to water, so I give up, I leave it to the younger generation. I think that mindset is ultimately what makes a person old, not necessarily rich. I mean, not necessarily by age, but when you think that you give up because I can't learn it anymore, old dog na ako, I can't learn new tricks. So that's what makes a person old. And so in a way, given that the age is of the incoming education secretary is younger, I'm hoping that she also thinks in a young person's perspective, meaning I can always learn something new. When it comes to education and technology, navigating this, like new environments for like basic education spaces. So education spaces nangyayari ngayon, it's not just in schools, right? You learn on social media, you learn from friends and in other areas. That requires kasi, I wanted to say nga na these new learning environments are basically stretch areas for older managers, because you need to learn how people learn nowadays. Right? I think that's the brilliance of TikTok. Because actually, like I think I mentioned this in our meeting kanina, Ching, like ByteDance, the mother company of TikTok, actually invested a lot of money trying to understand how people think. Ultimately, that's artificial intelligence, right? That's why in your, the short form content of the video, how easy it is to copy, like mirroring, ganyan. It's pedagogy. It's like how people learn. And so you need managers, education leaders who will really go the extra mile to understand now how students of this generation learn. And we can't just outsource it to younger people. Parang it's not my problem, young people will figure it out. I'm also kind of guilty of that sometimes in PBED, right? Oh my God, ano ba yan? Gagawa na naman tayo ng website, I don't understand it. Sige, outsource ko na yan sa comms team ko, bahala na sila. But it's not that, it's trying to understand it. And it's a stretch area that I think really educational leaders need to take seriously. Because, sorry, one anecdote lang, I've been parang, I guess, preaching. But one anecdote kasi, I was in this meeting about education futures and how we can, rebuild Philippine education. And there's this one startup founder, I won't say na lang the name baka kasi it was supposed to be a close meeting. But, a startup founder who said, there's so much data on education in the Philippines. Like DepEd has its own database. TESDA, CHED has its own database. DOLE and all these mga different government agencies doing training. And in the tech space, they have this thing called API that basically will allow different systems to communicate with each other. And in the end, wala tayong ganyan. So we just need someone like something like that technology to make sure that the different systems of different organizations are able to talk to each other. Like that insight, for example, requires creative thinking and also the acceptance that you don't know everything, and to really go to that stretch area. So, sorry, I was choppy. I don't know if I have to repeat what I had to say, but
But I,
Okay naman, naintindihan ko naman.
yeah, we understood it naman. Yeah. But sorry, I just but that's why we have to understand. Yeah, I was saying it kanina also, like um teaching in a way that, should we change the way we teach, diba? That's also something that we were talking about kanina. And also I'm actually something to look forward to with the new with the new secretary nga, is if there will be, new new insights or fresh perspective or something that she can bring in. So that one I'm looking forward to. And that's something that perhaps we can also contribute to, diba? Pero and I think that it's going to be like for us, Robbie, constant learning pa rin. And I'm sure you do that. I mean, I constantly provide guidance, even if it's something that, it will take a while for me to understand. Like, for example, TikTok. I mean, you get the gist and you kind of know like what kind of message you want to convey, right? And so even if I don't like who is, who the influencer is, or whether it's a song I don't really agree with, but if I can influence the content or the message, and it's in a way that is acceptable to the youth, then I'm completely fine with that. That I'm not letting go of, and I think it's constant learning process for everyone. So.
Kayo, Sab and Grace, what's your, just not necessarily a wish list, but something that you would hope for a new generation of not just educators, but also those managing our education systems? What would you like to see in them?
Sab, you want to go first?
I can go first. It might be a little controversial.
Go ahead.
I think that every teacher needs to do a little bit of presentation, needs to learn a little bit of theater, needs to learn a little bit of acting. Unfortunately, this is the situation we're in now, where you kind of have to be entertaining to keep people's attention on you. To capture all of these concepts, you need to find a way to make them digestible, to make them memorable. And so I think every teacher should go through an improv class, do a little bit of theater, learn a little bit more of that, because so many memorable teachers of mine that I've had not only had such a passion for what they were talking about, but also had a passion to present what they were excited about. So, they would present the information to us in such an incredible and interesting way that I remember them to this day. And so, it's been 15 years, I still remember all of that. And so that's, I think, something that, it might be a little controversial, but I think all teachers should take a theater class.
Yeah, I don't think it's controversial at all. I think a lot of people will actually get excited with that vision. I remember somebody posted recently, sabi niya, a friend of mine posted, and he said, terror teachers are overrated. And the reality is that I remember and learned more from teachers who taught with passion and who were aimed to inspire. And I think that's exactly a very, very good point that you also made. Grace?
Yeah, it's nice that Sab's wish list is all about our teachers and educators, because that's the angle also that I want to touch on. So my wish list is really focused on educators. Apart from like giving them that skill, I'd really like us to have an opportunity to think through their career, not just on the financial reward aspect, but really like what's that long-term career they could be building. Claro yung impact that they're making. And that's actually why we have really passionate teachers, diba? Because of that clear purpose. But every time someone pursues a career in other industries, claro yung path on how you are developing and also on how you get financially rewarded along the way. It would be nice to find out what is that clear path for our educators as well that is going to be comparable on how careers are built across all other industries.
What are things that actually really, on the other hand, make you sad even while the hope keeps you going, what are things that still keep you sad?
About education, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm sad
Well,
all
you
the
can talk
time.
about your love life kung gusto mo.
I don't know.
Kung
All the
hugot-gut
time,
mo, okay
love.
lang.
No, I'm sad. I'm sad because I just can't believe that for the amount of talent we have in the country, and like the educated resources that we've poured in. So I've been at this education work for only 10 years. And I feel like the 10 years were just lost. Like if I see, whenever I see like statistics on education about reading comprehension or like curriculum, I mean like disinformation, hindi nga misinformation in textbooks. I think in history text it's really disinformation. There is malintent, right, to like revise history or fudge it. And so I feel like the work that we've been doing, I've been doing, and I'm not just saying that I'm the only one, but because there are many, and to Ching's point, right, where it's a community, but parang wala. Like if you see the results, like output oriented, siguro this is the mga CEO bosses ko talking at the back of my head. No? Oh, at the end of the day, what do you have to show for it? And I'm like, what I have to show for it is like 90% of 10-year-olds can't read. And I'm like, were the policies that we've pushed for the wrong ones?
Actually, speaking of
ganyan.
speaking of disinformation, were we deluding ourselves for an entire generation? Kasi I grew up believing na, Filipinos, galing namin sa English. And then even if we knew our problems, all of this time we told ourselves, it's improving. In fact, yung shortage ng school rooms kumukonte. We're paying our teachers better. Kids now have more, all of these improvements. And then finally, the first baseline study comes out, and we're dead last. Diba? Parang speaking of fake news and disinformation, were we actually deluding ourselves all of these years?
In a way, probably. Like I'm just gonna get into trouble here. No, but I think it's because culturally we don't like bad news, right? We don't like looking at the data and seeing it for what it is. We like form. We value form over substance, right? So like ang galing natin mag-English. You hear like the accent, galing, it flows. But then, ano sinasabi ng taong to?
No,
Like,
it is a small percentage.
Diba? Pero like we have public officials, you've been to many of these events. They use highfalutin words. They sound so intelligent. But then if you really like look at the transcript, oh my God, what did this person just say? Right? So parang I think there is, yes, in a way, delusion. But I think also probably because as a culture, we are not that confrontational and we value form over substance, unfortunately.
But we have to confront, diba? Parang I think that's the real value of PISA and the UNESCO. Parang now there's no escaping it, and that's it. We took a long hard look. We had to swallow our pride, and nobody else was answering and explaining. Hindi, yan na yun. Parang wag ka na magtanong. Yan na yun. Yan na yung baseline natin. Parang there's no point in looking for any clarification here.
Yeah, definitely. And now just looking at, okay, what therefore, given, diba, parang when it comes to responding to a problem, now that we know that, pardon my French, shit has hit the fan, how do we, clean up, right, the mess? And then I think that should be that there. Like, there's the humility, right, of just accepting the reality and then moving forward and acting on it. Anyway, that was me being sad. And ranting about
but in the meantime, sige, wag naman tayo sad parate. Okay, Ching. On the other hand, ikaw, Ching, nagulat ako when in that youth-led event, punong-puno yung ballroom of really just idealistic young leaders and young people. When you meet them, and it's one thing to Zoom with them, but it's one thing to be with them all in one room. What jumps out at you, not just with their passion, but what was the education journey for all of these people? I mean, these young people that you've met, that you're working with with Youth Led, they come from Mindanao, Visayas, farthest reaches of Luzon. Does it strike you that each one of these people must have had, as Love said at the start, may journey and they must have an
Yes,
education story.
definitely. And not just an education story, but a life story. So, and so yeah, I'm not sad. I'm hopeful, and I'm very optimistic. As long as the right guidance. The guidance is always there. Kasi nga, it's so easy for them to lose hope, be disappointed, and all that. And okay, so I'm glad to have had the opportunity to also have these conversations with young people around the country na, because diba, Feb and March we went around face to face already, and I always tell nga, people that my conversations with young people in Mindanao and in Barm are really the most interesting for me, because it's also for me, they live their lives differently. They see things differently, and at the same time, all they want also is a better country, a better future. All of them, no? And what I want to do, because all of the young people I talk to are so galing and so involved, and I want to look for those young people who actually don't want to be a part of all these activities, who think that they are who prioritize, let's say, making a living instead of going to school, or making a living instead of attending these youth organizations, or being part of these leadership activities. That's my next that's my actually my next those are the next conversations I'm going to have, no, because I'm already so happy with with those that we've already reached out to, and those who are participating and being part of democracy and all that. Now I want to look for those young people who are also who we found that in our data, in our SWS survey, no, who are happy to stay in the Philippines. They don't have any desire to work abroad, you know, and at the same time they would like to prioritize making a living for their families over anything else. So I would like to reach out to them and talk to them and see what their role, what their role is now, in whether in the communities. I always talk about nation building, and I always talk about this long-term vision, because that's what we should be looking at. I leave the to Love, Sab, and and Grace.
Where did that come from, by the way? Nabanggit mo yan sa akin last time we saw each other dun sa election forum for Youth Led. The SWS study that you said, that the majority of the youth, they actually envision themselves here. The majority across.
Imagine, so this generation is different. Only
Isn't it sad that we're all surprised?
Yeah. I always want to be but imagine, because was different from, if you ask young people 25 years ago, they would all want to leave, right? Now, my goodness, only like 8% want to leave the country, and everybody else think that there's.
But where does that come from? I don't mean to be a cynic, but where is it coming from? Does it come from idealism, their own vision for themselves and for the country, or I don't know? Like I said, I don't mean to be a cynic. Or is it possible that these are the children and grandchildren of possibly one or two generations of OFWs?
Yes.
And they say, no, I will not be that.
Yes. So I had this conversation actually with Amina Rasul, who did the survey 25 years ago. She was NYC chair then, no? So I called her, we talked, and then we just compared notes and said, oh, the youth now are like this. And then she said, oh, no, generation namin, ganyan. Oh, actually, hindi naman generation niya, kasi tayo yung that age. Pero nung time niya, as NYC chair, yun yung mga lumabas, no? Again. And so we cited that as one of the factors. During that time, that was the time that a lot of families were separated, no? And they were abroad. And so ang naiwan yung mga anak, no, and mga bata, you know. So you actually have a generation that grew up with lolos, guardians, nannies, or one parent, no. And you can find some of them in this generation. No? Some of the young people that I talk to and even work with, no, still have parents who are abroad, no, and who still or who have experienced yung ganon na isang parent lang yun nandito kasi nagtrabaho sila sa labas, like that. So that is one we see that as one example, no? And then next is there's a lot of opportunity online. So a lot of young people are now venturing and finding financial productivity online, whether on online selling, because you have all of those platforms that you use for communication are also your platforms for making money and earning a living. And you can sell anything. You can sell your services, you know, make homework, make graphics, make like that, or you can sell goods, anything from a 5 peso shirt to shoes or whatever, like that, diba? Lahat na lang binenta na online. So those opportunities are there, and that's brought about by all this social media, etc. So we're looking at that one, and then plus because when we did our survey, remember ratings of President Duterte were still high, and regardless of what they thought of certain issues in the different sector, you know, where even if they thought that education wasn't doing so well or agriculture or whatever, all those, they still thought that the leadership was doing well. And when there's that confidence in leadership, even if he's not someone that we all agree with, they have that confidence and that desire to stay because they feel hopeful about staying in the country, like that. So iba kasi iba yung lumabas sa issues, iba yung lumabas sa leadership. Yan, no? So those two things. And then when you look at naman the result of staying in the country, you nako-connect namin these two, like that, no? So having like a or leader that they all believe in, right? Regardless of performance, it's something, no? So yeah, those three things, like that. Because you know, that 8% only who want to leave the country for better opportunities, that is something else. Yeah.
Grabe. Okay. Would you like to add anything, Grace? Anything you'd like to share, Sab?
I think from my end, yung one perspective lang I want to add, which is your first question, like, and even with the passion that we have staying onto the education space, what makes me sad with the situation, when I was like re-looking into what was the objective, strategy, and execution plan of this particular party, it's very sound and galing. Because like they just didn't deliver results. There was really like proper planning, very intentional, and how business people would structure their plans, they completely applied it in theirs. It's not just money. And like I recognize there's big amount of money invested there, but there's so much intelligence done behind that money as well. And for me, how could we speed up our level of intelligence and strategic thinking, plus long-term planning as well, so that we could safeguard the young ones? I think that's really where I am right now. Kaya parang where we have direct control of, how could we fast track that?
But I think the objective way of looking at it, I think, as you said, is look, you have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, clearly, it's data-driven,
exactly.
It's strategic thinking, it's planning, it's discipline, it's education, it's execution, and then and sustained. And your point is, if I had data-driven planning and disciplined execution, what else can we achieve? Diba? Ang dami-dami natin pwedeng magawa. No, I think it's a good point. It's a very, very valid point. Sab?
If you were talking about the things that make me sad, I guess one of the things, as a historian, I'm one of those people that reads all the time about the things that have happened in the past. And so it's so hard to see things happen again, and knowing that you can say, this, all of these things have happened before. We should be doing these things and not listening to misinformation. We should be more circumspect and not less circumspect. But there's nothing really to do about it. You can yell and yell and yell. And
but then from an education and historical standpoint, Sam, I'm just curious. Testing also your has this in fact happened before? Tell us. I mean, what are the episodes in the past where you can tell yourself, actually, parang this should not be, this is not a first. We have had to contend with a crisis in education, if not a crisis in historical awareness in the past.
I think we've had to worry about historical revisionism because, I mean, I don't want to cite, I don't know if I should cite specifics, but one of them was the Philippine-American War. We don't even think about it. We don't even study it. And, the Americans have rehabilitated their how they're seen here in the Philippines. The perspective of Americans are that they're friendly. And so that's the time that, our education basically was used a little bit against us because we were taught by the Americans to love America. And so, you can see how important education is and how quickly just that story changes as soon as you start dealing with the children. As soon as it's the kids that you're teaching, they grow up, and all of those formative years that they were educated in a certain way, it comes out. And so this is what has happened before, where misinformation has led to us sort of erasing an entire piece of our history.
That's true. I mean, you have a whole generation, even right now, who's only now learning about Balangiga, diba? And massacres. And yeah, parang there was a time when I know historians and educators in the United States had to lobby the libraries to reclassify the Philippine insurrection as a Philippine-American war. And that was actually led by academics, by historians, researching that no, in the card catalog, you have to call it a war, not an insurrection.
It's one of the longer wars of the Americas, and we don't talk about it. We don't think about it. And I'm so accustomed to hearing people say, "Oh, I don't want to learn about history. It's boring." And then you have to contend with the frustration of all of these things have happened before.
No, but I actually, just on history, Sab, I mean, maybe a more recent one, right? Like, and you're the historian here, but like, I was looking at before the Bangsamoro Basic Law was passed. Actually, I was looking at how education was used to suppress our Muslim brothers and sisters in Mindanao, and it was actually a state policy to put Muslims in a negative light.
Yes. That's right.
And you see that in the textbooks. The Moros are magnanakaw, mga ganyan. And you see that, right? And so it's actually maybe not historical revisionism during that time, but it's
but it was in a
real
way,
real time, like writing of wrong,
that's
wrong,
right.
perception of history.
Yeah, but and not just what's fascinating about Moro, the word Moro, is at one point, you're right, I grew up in that generation where Moro was stigmatized, diba? It wasn't even for me consciously referring to Muslim Filipinos. Basta pagka sinabing Moro, matakot ka. 'Di ba? Parang it was violent in my mind. It was bloody in my mind. That's not a place that you would want to be, and so on. But what's also fascinating is as the history is recaptured and protected, the Moro people also get to claim back that word. they also get to claim. So that now you say Bangsamoro, and it sounds hopeful. Parang it's no it not only did they take away the stigmatization, you get the chance to reverse it, and the emotional image and effect it has on you is actually positive. It's actually aspirational.
True.
True, and actually, to your point, Robbie, I mean, that is a source of hope, right? Like the Bangsamoro people were able to reclaim their history, were able to reclaim their narrative, but it's years, decades of really fighting for that. And so I just hope, I mean, history, right? It's a constant writing, rewriting, spelled WRITING and RIGHTING. To work on that, because history is not static. It's something that you need to work on all the time. And the Bangsamoro people were able to do it. I think for us, especially now, in this critical moment, we should continue working to reclaim that narrative, right?
Yeah, we have a sort of a duty now. We have a duty now to constantly remind people of our history and to constantly remind people that this happened, these things happened, and this was what happened because of them. This is the consequence, because that consequence is what we're going to be, is what we had to reckon with, and and consequences are what we're going to have to reckon with as we go forward. And so it's just part and parcel now of anyone's literacy in the world is being historically literate and to understand how that has affected us, because it makes such a big difference when you understand where you're coming from and what your sort of legacy is.
Okay, we'll wrap this up with this one question, which is actually the whole point of this series, the Chito Gascon Leadership series. And alam niyo naman, ang title nito is Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. And so we always end this program with you, asking you to complete that sentence. Ching, Love, Sab, Grace, pagdating sa edukasyon sa Pilipinas, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, ano?
Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, matuto. Always. Learn always, all the time, constantly, consistently. So, yeah. One word lang ba? Or dapat?
No, it can be anything. It can be anything. You can take another hour kung gusto mo.
Perfect.
But I like that. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, matuto. That's nice.
Sa akin, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, simulan mo at tapusin mo. So wag lang tayo to actually having a conversation right now. And I know all of us are not just having conversations. Tinatapos natin yung sinisimulan natin.
Sam?
Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, kailangan magtrabaho. I think we all need to work now. I think unfortunately that's where we are. Like, we all need to work now. We all need to keep history alive. We all need to be telling each other, helping each other be more responsible with what we're sharing, helping each other be more responsible with what we're saying and what we're doing. I think that there's a lot of work that we all need to do now. We have to do those little incremental things. We have to help our lolas with YouTube and tell them that the Facebook sharing is maybe not the best place to get their information, things like that. So I think we all need to do that work.
And Ching?
Naman, mga one-liners
Hindi kailangan ng one-liner.
Di na OP naman ako. So, na lang. Okay. Diba, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, sama-sama tayo there. So, because education is a community effort. It's the family, it's the parents, the students, the family, the community, society, and the country working together, for shared progress. Yeah. So, yeah. Otherwise, we'll go on forever.
Okay, sige. Maraming salamat sa inyo, sa lahat ng sumama sa atin. Ching Jorge, Love Basillote, Grace David, and Sab Schnabel. Maraming salamat. And thank you to everyone who's watching. If you found any or all of this useful, please share it with a friend. This entire series is available in video on Asia Society Philippines Facebook and YouTube pages at Asia Society PH. And the highlights of each episode will be on podcast form, care of Puma Podcast. They can be found on Puma Podcast, on Spotify, or wherever you listen. Pwede niyong hanapin. Just search for Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. It will be there, and including all our past episodes in the series. And this episode, in fact, includes the first season of Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago, the Chito Gascon Leadership series. Of course, we would like to thank the family of our good friend and the great friend Chito Gascon for allowing us to use his name and allowing us to honor his legacy. Maraming salamat sa Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, Bukas, Conversations for Action, and Youth Leadership for Democracy or Youth-Led. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Salamat.